Hello. It's very nice to speak to you. Weird, but nice. So we've got Mark 1:21 to 29 today. It's pretty funny that I get this passage, actually, because it's about authority and what that means in large part. And I've always had a fairly complicated relationship with authority. So it's funny. It's very funny, yes. When I was at primary school, so 6 or 7 years old, Mrs. Jenkins told me that I was too big for my boots and that I should pull my socks up. This was a pretty confusing message for a literal-minded child, but I have to say it was probably true then, and it's probably true now. So to have a passage all about authority is, funny. So we see Jesus teaching in a new and authoritative way here in the synagogue when some guy shouts out, "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." Jesus tells him to be silent and to come out of him. The man convulses and cries out, and the people are amazed. This is a great story for now. It's the end of January, and in a good year, this is a tiring time for those of us in the Northern Hemisphere. It's dark, it's cold, and this year in particular, everything is just that much harder. If you're like me, your anxiety is generally a little higher, things seem a little harder, our patience is a little more thin. So when we read this story, we can empathise with Jesus. He's trying to do authoritative teaching, and here's this guy essentially heckling him. So Jesus seems a little bit cheesed off, maybe, a bit snippy, a bit shouty, and we think, Jesus, I hear you, people are idiots. But the stories of Jesus suggest that there's a bit more to it. A lot of commentators focus on the idea of authority here and in the whole of Mark. They'll say that we see demonstrated here that Jesus can command and control demons and unclean spirits. I think with this kind of interpretation, we imagine in the story Jesus using a loud voice, booming over the top of this shouting man, like James Earl Jones or Brian Blessed. "Be silent and come out of him." Maybe. It does say that Jesus rebuked, which seems pretty firm, but it doesn't say he shouted. That's the kind of authority that requires nothing from us. We're passive. The man is passive and Jesus takes control. The man is separated from the unclean spirit and is not consulted, not asked consent for what Jesus demands. We often resent that kind of authority. So maybe we can think about this story a little differently. It may be that we can imagine ourselves in this story from the perspective of Jesus, or the crowd who are amazed by Jesus' teaching, or even the man who shouts out. We're probably less inclined to put ourselves in the shoes of the unclean spirit. But this is a spirit that recognises Jesus, that understands his connection to the overwhelming love of God, and is terrified. This voice of fear recognises that love casts out fear, that this voice has come to destroy fear. There's a psychotherapeutic theory called internal family systems. Maybe you've heard of it. Essentially, it proposes that we all have voices in our heads, characters even. Some of these characters, these parts of us, trouble us. They are the voices of fear, of anger, of control, and so on. But this theory carries the conviction that all the voices in our heads think they are helping us. They think they are doing an important task for us. The theory calls these voices protectors. And the goal of the therapy is not to ignore these voices, but to face them, to get to know them, to ask them what they think they're protecting us from, and to persuade them that they can stand down. The theory suggests that often these characters, these parts of us, think that they are doing an important job of protecting another part of us that sits behind them. Often the part of us that is a vulnerable, weak, maybe ashamed child. So the task of this therapy then is to convince the protector that they can relax, they're not needed, that the person is an adult now. We can then befriend the vulnerable part of us that is ashamed and that hides behind this protector. We quieten the protector and empower the child. So we could think about this story through that lens. What if, instead of a rather cross Jesus shouting across a crowded room, we imagine that he stopped? What if Jesus immediately saw the true man hidden behind that voice of fear, the vulnerable man who knew who he was and was frightened, causing his protector part to shout out? John O'Donoghue writes that there is a place in us that has never been wounded, and a God of love relates to that part of us. We know who you are. What if Jesus stopped talking and walked over to the man, put his hands on his shoulders, looked into his eyes, saw him, saw the clean spirit, and said, not in anger but in love, "Be silent and come out of him." There's still a rebuke, but it is in the form of a turning of the voice of fear away, informing that part of him that it is not needed, and indeed needs to be set aside so that the powerful, vulnerable man can connect directly and safely with unconditional love. It's no wonder that the man shrieks and falls down. Imagine the release of falling into that safe place. That is the authority of Jesus, the integrity and firmness of his rootedness in uncoercive love. I think we mostly look at God's grace and God's immense love out of the corner of our eye. We do fear that if we looked at it directly, we would be destroyed. Our protector voices tell us so. We fear that the Holy One of God would reflect our human understanding of authority and control, and we would lose our freedom, our power, and our identity. But what if freedom doesn't mean autonomy, but means trust? What if being free means being liberated to trust this love? What if power is not individual, but what happens when we relate to others, to God, in love, and the amazing things that can then happen? What if authority means the power to act, and we are invited to improvise our way together with God and each other into an unknown future? What if accepting God's love doesn't lead to our destruction, but burns away our fear? Can we imagine Jesus stopping, coming over, looking us in the eye, seeing us, and addressing our fear directly from a place of deep love? Our fear will blurt out, "Have you come to destroy us?" And the answer will be yes, and our strivings will cease. Our boots will be the right size, our socks will be pulled up, and we will go in peace to love and serve the Lord.